Graham Stephan treated us with a little story time about the aftermath of dealing with a tenant that moved out of one of his rental single-family residences, SFRs. And I actually like Graham Stephan reaction videos, so I took it upon myself to react to this. I have a feeling he probably experienced what many of my clients experience, dealing with tenants vacating a property either voluntarily on good terms or through eviction. So let's see what happened with Graham.
As somebody who's been in the real estate industry for 14 years, it's only a matter of time until eventually you come across a situation like this. So I'm going to walk you through one of my properties that was recently left in complete disrepair, and then I will explain where I went wrong, what I could have done better, and how you can make sure you never find yourself in a similar situation. Or if you're just curious what happened and you have no intention of ever owning a rental property, keep watching all the way through to the end, because I'm about to drive there right now to check it out. All right, here it is. The moment of truth. All right, we are seeing it for the first time, and I don't know if there's any electricity.
Probably not. They probably shut it off.
Yeah, wow. Yikes.
Before we go into the video, it's clearly a mess. There's going to probably be more of a mess. If you are a landlord and you have a rental property that you buy and you rehab, or just in the general course of rehabbing maybe like multiple units or units in an apartment building, you want to use construction grade, or contractor grade as they sometimes call it, materials. So things that are designed to somewhat withstand wear and tear. So for instance, like the floors, they have now what is waterproof laminate, and that's nice because if a tenant spills water or there's some sort of leak or something like that, it tends to not warp the floor. So when you are a landlord, if you're a new landlord or an existing landlord, you might want to look into coming up with some sort of palette, go-to materials. Tiles, nice because you can clean it easily. Laminate floors are nice because you can clean it easily. You kind of want to have backup materials in case you have to cut out a portion of the floor or replace some tile. It's nice to have that on stock, and you can get it pretty much in bulk, very cheap. And this is a house, but if you have like multiple units, you can have all the units basically look the same as they come up vacant or as they need to be repaired. But this so far kind of looks like he has the contractor grade stuff in here, which is, pretty good.
Is there any electricity, please?
No electricity, and having a fridge is terrifying. It doesn't look like there's a fridge in here, but that's always scary, is when there's a unit and the tenant has turned off power in their name, so there's no electricity, but there's a fridge and they have not cleaned up a lot of this stuff. So lucky for him, it doesn't seem to be that there's a fridge. That's always terrifying.
So we got no electricity here, but as you can see, wow, there is just so much stuff everywhere. I'm probably gonna have to turn on the light. Here's the living room. As you can see, these are the floors that were installed about 10 years ago, and they actually look to be in okay condition, pretty dirty. The walls though, what happened? I don't know. Look, they have a whole bunch of these just completely stuck in the wall. Nothing was really taken care of at all in here, it seems like, and they just left so much stuff. Here's the kitchen. The good news is that it does seem as though once everything is removed, it might actually clean up, but let's see what's through here. Oh.
So in this case, from what I recall, Graham Stephan has rentals in California. I believe he has single family housing, I want to say in like San Bernardino. But in general, there's usually rules about stuff that's left behind. So you want to get the right paperwork. Hopefully the tenants have abandoned all this stuff and just said, hey, you can trash it. We don't want to keep any of it. I don't know how the possession got returned back to Graham. I don't know if it was through some sort of eviction, or maybe they came to an agreement that we're going to move out and yada yada yada. So a lot of the stuff is probably abandoned. Hopefully he has that in writing. That would be prudent. Not legal advice, but in general, you should have as much as you can in writing. But this is about several $1,000s in Holloway, and this is actually not the worst I've seen. I've seen some pretty gnarly houses with hoarders, especially hoarders with animals. It's very gross. Yeah, this tenants just up and leaving and abandoning their junk is very common.
Jeez.
All right, before we continue with the rest of the home, let's explain how we got here. This is a property that I purchased back in 2012 as a bank-owned short sale after saving up my commissions for 4 years as a real estate agent. Back then, nearly a third of all homeowners were underwater on their mortgage, and this was no exception. The seller had purchased it at the peak of the market in 2005 for $230,000, only to sell it 7 years later for about $70,000. Now, when I bought it, even though the bones of the house were fantastic, it wasn't exactly turnkey, so I spent every last penny I had remodeling it, fixing it up, redoing the floors, repainting the interior.
I want to comment. This looks very good. He used what seem to be some pretty durable materials, and it looks like he probably repurposed stuff that was originally there. Like that vanity looks like it was probably original or there when he bought it. But it's very good because he has essentially what this looks to be is move-in photos. It's very good, and this surprisingly does not happen, but when you move in a tenant into any unit, I consider houses units, I'll call them a unit. When you move them into any of your properties, you want to have move-in photos. Move-in photos are great. You can also do a move-in video, but I like photos because it shows you without a lot of movement what the thing looked like. And you want to get photos of the floor, so you have evidence of what the floor condition was in. Ceiling, especially in the bathrooms, underneath the sink, is a good one to have photos of to document the condition it was in. Because as you can clearly see, the house looked great when they moved in, and it looks like not great. I don't know what happened with security deposit, but they would not be entitled to it. I would imagine it's going to cost a lot of money, and a lot of this is beyond reasonable wear and tear, which dealing with security deposits is like a whole other topic that I'm not going to touch on. But it's good that he has these photos because it's a record of what the property looked like before they moved out, because it's supposed to pretty much look exactly the same with reasonable wear and tear. Reasonable wear and tear is something that people can argue about, but clearly from the video, how they left the house is beyond reasonable wear and tear. But it's good to have move-in photos. Not everybody does it, and that's kind of annoying.
The landscape, and then I rented it out, and that very same tenant was here for 10 years, but all of this was not the result of normal wear and tear.
All right, I'm going in with the iPhone light. Oh man, it just keeps going. Wow. Wow.
Okay, just for housekeeping, the tenant's been there for 10 years, so I doubt he's gone there very often to look at this. But that's the water heater, and it looks like maybe that was the laundry room, because it seemed to be they had some sort of stickers about laundry. Tenants do this, and it's really annoying. They somehow have like an accumulation of wet clothing that they'll leave like on the walls or near the walls or on the floor, and that's always very problematic. Not all tenants do it, but I've seen tenants do it, and it creates like a mold issue. If you are familiar with the house, if you're doing somewhat inspections, you would be able to catch early on that it looks like mold is, possibly growing. I can't tell from the video if that's what's going on here, but that's the laundry area, and that's always a spot that landlords should check if there's, in-unit laundry, is that the tenants are maintaining that area in a clean condition, because they'll, there's a lot of complaints about mold, and a lot of the times it's the tenants and how they treat their own laundry, but that area looked really gross. So that's, gonna require cleanup.
Oh, jeez. As you can see here, they just left everything behind. There's food.
Must be the pantry.
Just
and
an
closet.
Entire wardrobe of stuff. It is unbelievable how dirty the place is. Now, here's the garage. Let's see what's through here.
Now, before we finish up the rest of the tour, admittedly, I was likely too easygoing as a landlord. After 10 years, I considered the tenant to be a friend. We were on fantastic terms, and I would have done anything I could to help out.
I did a video on this, which is a shameless plug. You can look at it on my channel. The dynamic between landlord and tenant is one rooted in civility, as most dynamics are. But they're not ones in which the foundation is friendship. The landlord is providing a habitable premise when it comes to residential real estate, and the tenant is paying to to use and occupy said premise. You give them property, they give you money, that's how it goes. When you get too friendly with tenants, which you should be friendly, when you shouldn't be rude or mean or incorrigible, you have to always understand that this is, your property and they're essentially borrowing it for pay, but it's not theirs. And so sometimes tenants don't have the kind of respect for the property that they would have if it was theirs, or maybe they just don't have good housekeeping, which is very, very common. But having a relationship in which you're cordial, but you are enforcing your rights as a landlord is very good, and that should be set up early on in the relationship, because then it sort of lays the foundation of the expectations the tenants have, which is, hey, the landlord's going to make sure that I keep up this place. The landlord's going to ding me if I pay for stuff and he's going to make me repair it, things like that. And I totally understand his dynamic or his feeling about it, which is, I don't want to get rid of a tenant that seems to be a good tenant. I don't want to push them away. I don't want to scare them off. So you over accommodate. That is not really the precedent that you want to set. And likewise for a tenant, like a tenant doesn't want to be, going above and beyond what they need to do with the expectation that at the end of the day, they're just going to have their way regardless. And I've seen that a lot, especially with single family housing. A tenant in an apartment is a completely different kind of tenant than one who lives in a triplex, a fourplex, a duplex. Completely different from single family residence tenants. They're three different kinds of tenant, and their personalities are drastically different. You get a feel for that the more that you have real estate and you manage it. But in dealing with cases that I have to deal with, especially when I deal with, buyout situations or lease termination situations where we try to terminate the lease before going to an eviction and reach an amicable solution before going to court, I've noticed that there's just apartments versus 2 to 4 units versus a house. The tenants have just very different personalities altogether. And ones that live in houses tend to be less willing and cooperative in giving the house back, either because the lease is over, because the landlord ends a month-to-month lease. Tenants are the least cooperative in that kind of setting. So not that that's here, I don't know what these tenants were like, but when he says he was super friendly, I caution landlords, be friendly, but also be firm in enforcing your rights.
Mentioned before that I've never once raised rent on this property.
No. I think I talk about this also in that video I did. Not raising rent does not make you a good landlord. It sounds so peaceful in theory, but you end up regretting it, and you can't get back that money, and you can't throw it in your tenant's face because it's not the tenant's fault you didn't raise their rent. And you cannot expect that a tenant is going to appreciate that. Tenants expect rent to be raised annually. COVID, eviction moratoriums aside, tenants expect every year their rent's going to go up. Not raising the rent is never going to foster goodwill from the tenant. It's not going to do it. I stand by that statement. It will not. You will not get rewarded for that from the tenant at all, ever. And it's not a good business decision because income property is a business. And your mortgage, while it more or less can stay the same unless you refinance it, your property taxes go up every year, your insurance goes up every year. Especially, this is in California, insurance goes up for a number of reasons. And this is single family, depending on the zone. The insurance can go up simply because of all the fires in the state. So not raising rent's not going to help you pay for that premium. And maintenance goes up. Inflation, the cost of materials and supplies have gone up. Cost of labor, contractors' prices, all that stuff goes up. So not raising the rent, you could ultimately be underwater on your income property, and then you're going to feel really bad about that. And you can't take it out on the tenant. It's not their fault. You chose not to raise the rent when you were allowed to do so. So that's not good.
Despite the market rate today being almost double from what I was originally charging. But I just thought to myself, I've never had a single issue. I rarely ever have a vacancy across my entire portfolio. It's easy to manage myself. And hey, if they move out in the future, I could re-rent it back at market rate, and then everything will be good.
I get that.
Have this much stuff.
People accumulate a lot.
Okay. Let's see how the bedrooms are doing. I'm gonna close that. Let's walk through. Okay, so we got a whole bunch of cans.
They recycled.
What about through here? Okay. Yeah, look. There's stuff in every single one of the cabinets.
Open food like that, pest
Let's
control
see what's below
issue.
Here. Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, even the pots and pans, stationery items. All right, now let's see the bedrooms. I wish we had some electricity just to get an idea. So we got a closet. Let's go down. Let's start with this bedroom. Oh, wow. So I have a feeling most likely what's going to happen is that all of this stuff is going to have to be removed, and then the entire property will likely need to be repainted. Let's see if they left some. Yeah, look. There's stuff in here too. Here's one of the bathrooms. Another bedroom. Again, they just left a lot of stuff behind.
I'm not looking for any sympathy here whatsoever because I'm sure the tenant had their own struggles that I can't even begin to fathom. But deep down, I'm more disappointed because I didn't really care about the person who was living there. And I show you this as the reality where sometimes things like this happen even if you end up doing everything right.
Things will happen like that if you're a landlord. If you scale your portfolio in the sense that you add more units, whether you buy more houses, you buy apartments, even if you buy commercial, like multi-tenant commercial, things like this will happen. And if you're someone who is a landlord, this hasn't happened to you, awesome. If you're someone who's a new landlord, prepare yourself for things like this because it probably will happen. But this actually, I mean, the house, the condition that it's in is not terrible. I've seen tenants hardcore retaliate against their landlord and like straight up destroy a house. And there's always, two sides to a story, but if you're a landlord, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
I once met a real estate investor who hasn't had at least one of these situations happen over the span of their career. That's why it's always ideal to budget for the worst but plan for the best. And this is an example of doing exactly that.
So just for some context, I'll throw up some pictures of what it used to look like before. And you know what? I mean, it comes with the territory, and I gotta say, I had absolutely no idea that the property was reduced to this condition.
I want to comment on that. It seems like, I think from watching his videos, I think he lived like on the west side of Los Angeles, and this I want to say is like out in San Bernardino, which is like, depending on how far out there is, it's like an hour, 2 hours. So it's not like around the corner you can go address it or look at the place. I have a feeling he may not have routinely inspected the property. I'm not going to assume that. I don't know. But considering how shocked he is at the condition of it, I doubt in the 10 years that this tenant was there that he like went in and checked on the property. You should, especially in, for real estate that's far away from you, that you can't gauge it on the day-to-day or drive by it, you should check the property every 6 months or every 12 months and take photos, do an inspection so that you keep tabs on the condition, and then you have photos of the premises throughout time. And if there's stuff that they're doing that is negligent or they've damaged it for whatever reason that they've damaged it that's not reasonable wear and tear, then over time you can have them correct it. And in that sense, when you put them on notice, hey, you caused this damage, you're expected to pay for it, they might be more mindful going forward of what they're doing in the house to maintain the house because they don't want to pay for it. If you're not inspecting it and you're not keeping track of it, there's no recourse for what they're doing. So like in this instance, they're gone, and trying to collect money for these damages against them is probably going to be hard because it seems like they weren't in the financial condition to maybe continue to pay rent. So, they're not going to be in the financial position to pay him back this money to fix up the house for the damage they caused. But maybe if he had done it over the years, systematically once or twice a year, inspected it and then itemized and say, hey, you caused this damage. Like, maybe a window broke, or if they're like owner provided blinds and the blinds are broken or missing. There's holes in the wall, there's damage to the wall. You can systematically track that and tell them, hey, you pay for it and you fix it and send me the photos, or I'm going to have someone fix it and I'm going to bill it to you. Very early on, you'll set precedent that, hey, I as a landlord expect you to maintain this property in the condition I leased it to you. and that I'm not going to tolerate you doing damage like this. Not doing that, you wind up finding your house 10 years later with a bunch of problems, and you're going to have to foot the tab for it. And this is, to get this house back in leasable condition is probably 12 to 20 grand. It depends on how much he really wants to rehab it, but this is like several $1,000s that he has to go out of pocket to pay for this, that I'm sure is above and beyond what the security deposit was. So those are just things to take into consideration. Also, let's say there is some damage and the tenant, you itemize and you give it to the tenant, and the tenant says, take it out of my security deposit. I would not opt for that. I wouldn't make the tenant pay it right there. The security deposit is meant to really be used for when you move out at the very end. You ideally kind of want to give it back to them because you want to have the thing in a great condition and rent paid up, but you don't want to necessarily be having them tap into their security deposit because it's very hard for them to replenish that. So even if they were to deduct the security deposit, you would then want them to replenish the security deposit. So just be careful when you're dealing with actually sending these maintenance bills to these tenants, the way you negotiate them paying that. They should just pay it.
Thankfully, the floors look okay. I don't know what this stuff is, though.
That'll probably come off.
Is this gonna come off?
Probably.
Oh, that's baked on there. Yeah, see, I have absolutely no idea what that is.
Grout gets gnarly.
Hopefully this will be able to clean up. Look at the grout, by the way.
Grout just
this
gets
grout
gnarly.
used to be white, and now
they spilled stuff on it for sure.
What is that wire? I'm wondering if they removed maybe a smoke detector. Without me knowing.
This is a pet peeve of mine, and you see this a lot, especially in apartment buildings. For whatever reasons, tenants will take out the smoke detectors, or sometimes they're combos, they're smoke detector, monoxide detectors, and they'll take them out. A lot of them, that one probably was hardwired, but a lot of them run off batteries, or they have batteries in them, and when the batteries die, they beep, and tenants will just yank them off the wall or off the ceiling and not change the battery. I don't understand. I don't know why they do that. That's something that happens a lot in LA for like SCEP inspections. The tenants will take off the smoke detectors and monoxide detectors, or they'll take out the batteries. Such a pet peeve. It's so annoying.
Wow. Yeah, look. It looks like they've taken down the smoke detectors. And I remember, by the way, going to Home Depot 10 years ago,
be surprised if they're all
buying
missing.
this, bringing it from the place, and having the contractors install it.
Now, in terms of how much this is going to cost to fix, I'm guessing a few $1,000s for trash removal, a few $1,000s for paint, another few $1,000s making sure everything is in working order, a few $1,000s in lost rent, and then I'm selling it. This is something that I've wanted to do since the beginning of the year, but given the circumstances, I haven't been able to list it as quickly as I would have liked. But now that I could get this fixed back up.
The circumstance was probably because it was tenant occupied. For single family residences, it's very hard to sell a tenant occupied property for the simple fact that most people who buy single family residences are buying it to owner occupy, for they themselves to live in, and the banks require that they take possession of the property. So if they buy it and they get financing for it through typically a conventional loan, the bank requires that they live in it, otherwise they can't buy it. So I don't know if that was the situation here, but I do know that that comes up often, where it's really hard to list and sell a tenant occupied house specifically, given the pool of people that are going to be buying it. I don't know if an investor would buy this house. It's probably going to be someone who plans to live in it. That's my 2 cents on that.
I think it's time to let it go. The fact is, since I no longer live in California, it's begun to make a lot more sense to sell off a few of those first few properties and then move that into something else. Perhaps it'll be in Las Vegas, maybe it'll be a commercial rental property, or maybe it'll go back into index funds. But
commercial rental, different beast, can be good. When you run into multi-tenant commercial is another set outside this video. It's way too much to talk about. That's like a whole other set of things that you have to deal with, is multi-tenant commercial. They're about as needy as residential. So it's people like that, the returns are good. It's not necessarily passive. It's maybe slightly more passive depending, but again, it all comes down to you enforcing your rights as a landlord and the precedent you set in your behavior towards tenants.
Say, even with a management company, owning a rental property is not truly passive income.
Thank you. I have to keep pausing this because he's making very valid points. Rental income. I see people talk about it like you buy a house and you put $2 down and you get this loan with this kind of financing and yada, 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 and there's all these programs. If you can get yourself a grip of dough to buy an income property, that's amazing. That takes a lot of hard work, patience, diligence, and just severe discipline. So hats off to people who will pull that off. But if you're someone who's done that, or you're someone who's in the pursuit of trying to get income property and enter that game, it is not passive. You don't just like buy a property, put a tenant in it, and then like collect money and, you know, yada yada. It's not passive. You have to be involved. And it's not a 9-to-5 job, you know, necessarily, unless you have a pretty big portfolio. But when you're starting out, it's, you know, a good way to make money. But as you can see here, if you don't maintain the property, a lot of your profit could be in fixing up the damage that a tenant left. So it's not passive. Graham could have potentially avoided some of that damage, or could have curbed it by, you know, insisting that the tenants upkeep the property if he had seen the condition earlier. But that is not passive. That involves you actively going and looking at the property and confronting the tenants, which is, people hate confronting people. It's uncomfortable. But that's kind of what you need to do. So no, real estate is not necessarily passive. And I think that is a misconception that needs to be quashed.
It requires a consistent amount of work if you're
Correct.
expected to be successful at it.
Yes.
So in terms of what you could do to avoid something like this happening, here's my advice.
Oh, wow. All right, this is probably the worst of it. Wow, so they ended up leaving a lot of items over here as well. I see a refrigerator on this one side. I see a couch at the very back of the backyard. I also see what looks to be a washer or a dryer just over here. Some kids' toys. I have no idea what all of this is.
All right, now in terms of how you could avoid this happening to you, first, I think a lot of people paint homeownership as a fast way to make a lot of money. And don't get the wrong idea, because it can be quite profitable, but it comes with the risk that something can happen. That's why it's so important to always have a home emergency fund equal to 3 to 6 months worth of your home's expenses at all times. That way you're not
3 is the low end. Conservatively, you want to have 6 months of reserve. This I've seen come up with commercial property. My clients have refinanced. The lender will require 6 months of reserve be held by the lender for usually like 12 months, and then they'll release it back. But when you go to, like, let's say refinance, they want to see that you have some sort of money in the bank in reserve, especially, you know, because they want to make sure that you're going to be paying the note, the debt service, the mortgage, all synonyms. So 3 months is on the low end. 6 months is what you want to aim to have, and you want to have it so that you can pay the mortgage. You know, you have the reserve in the assumption that rent's not going to be coming in, but you got to keep, you know, going with the property. So if you have a mortgage, which in this case, this is a house. If he has a mortgage on it, he probably has an escrow impound account. Every month, they take the property taxes and the insurance and they prorate it, and then they bill you every month and they collect it, and then the mortgage company will pay the insurance and will pay the property taxes out of a money that they set aside that they collect from you every month. So you would, when you pay the mortgage, you could be paying the principal, the interest, and then the escrow, which covers the property taxes and insurance. When you go online and you see those like mortgage calculators, it covers those, covers the principal, the interest, property taxes, insurance. That's usually what the mortgage calculator is. So if you have that built into your mortgage, you know, then you want to have 6 months of whatever that bill typically is. And then every year they usually reassess it. So if they over collected, they might give you a check back. If they under collected, then they'll take the difference and bill it for the next year. So you want to have basically 6 months reserved of the mortgage, interest, property taxes, insurance. If you're paying any utilities, which in a single family residence, usually the tenant pays all the utilities, you know, potential maintenance money, maybe landscaping. Like in this case, there wasn't much landscaping, but in the backyard, there was weed overgrowth. There was, you know, trees that hadn't been trimmed. So if you had like a landscaper, you might want to have reserve for that. That's not super necessary, but basically you want to have 6 months of operating costs covered and saved. Landscaping is really kind of non-operating costs, but if you want to be conservative, you know, you'll have 6 months of keeping things going.
a pocket for any damage, lost rent, or anything else that comes your way. Second, understand that it's going to take work. I've been in a position where I both managed properties myself and hired a property manager. And even with the property manager, there are still issues that come up every now and then where I need to be involved. It's not a huge deal, but it's also not a business where you could just hire things out and then sail off into the sunset doing nothing for the rest of your life ever again. And finally, third, with higher returns usually comes higher risk. Admittedly, I was not charging anywhere near the amount that I should have. And even though it's okay to accept below market rent for the sake of finding a great quality long-term tenant, it's still a business. And there needs to be a middle ground between being able to treat people generously, but still being able to run it like a business.
Correct. I don't think I need to see the rest of the video. All makes sense to me. I'm really bummed that he has this learning curve, or that he experienced this, but he has very good points that he made. Having an emergency fund, understanding and accepting that you have to be involved. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. I guess understanding that concept fundamentally is helpful, but like I talked about earlier, not raising rent creates, you're just going to be upset about it later on, and you're going to want to take it on the tenant, and you're going to say, I never raised your rent, why are you treating me this way? And then tenants are not going to care about that. They're not going to be sympathetic to that, and you're not going to get the back rent out of them. I mean, there's no back rent. You didn't raise the rent, but you're not going to get compensated for that goodwill. So there is, like you said, a middle ground for, single family residences. By and large, they're not rent controlled, so there's no cap on how much you can raise them. So you could raise them reasonably every year. He's in real estate, so he could have gotten comps every year when it came time to renewal, which that's very common in commercial. If there's options built in, there's different ways you can set up an option to renew, and one of them is getting comps in the area at the time of renewal. So he could have gotten comps and say, hey, here's the comps in the area, and they could have negotiated a rent increase that made sense for him, made sense for his tenants, and I think would have been a form of collaboration that would have still been rooted in goodwill. But not raising the rent, I hear that a lot from clients all the time. I never raised rent. Why tenants are not cooperating. I was such a good landlord. No, there's not going to be really many opportunities in which a tenant is forever grateful for that. Some of them are, that's great. By and large, don't expect that to be something that manifests like you getting your way later on in life, trying to get your tenant to move out and throwing in their face that you never raised rent on them. That's not going to help the situation. Not that he was doing that, but I know many clients who've called me and they've made that point to the tenant, and that's really made it difficult to resolve disputes between landlords and tenants. But they kind of set themselves up to fail. All in all, he seems to be very level-headed about it, so that's good. I hope that his rehab bill is not super expensive, and he's listing it, so whatever he does, he'll probably get back in selling the property. But that was a very good video learning lesson, I think, for many landlords, especially because landlords typically start out with a small house or a duplex, so this would be someone in a field of where new landlords would be. And those are all the factors that he brought up are all things that you should take into consideration. That was informative. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.